Alteryx Designer is an ETL program for all your data manipulation needs. Let's take a look at the basics. The Alteryx UI is split into three main sections. We have the workflow, preview, and the configuration. Up at the top, you'll see a number of tiles. Each of these tiles performs a different task. For example, the input data tile is used to draw data into Alteryx. Up here, you can see there are different sections. Each of these different sections contains different tiles. This can be useful for finding the right tile for the job that you want to do. For example, if I had spatial data, maybe some of the spatial tiles could help me. So I click on spatial, and then I can have a look at all of the different tiles under that heading. Let's begin with an input data tile. If we drag it onto the canvas, you'll notice the configuration window changes. If we click this drop-down arrow, we can select one of many different data connections. If we go to Files, you can see all of the supported file types. In the Data Sources tab, we can connect to data sources that may not be on your local PC. For example, any cloud storage you may have. For the moment, let's just stick to Files. We have two options here. We can click one of these extensions to upload a specific file type, or we can click the Select File button here. Now we can locate the file that we want to upload. Once you have your sample data, highlight it, click Open. As it is an Excel document, we have to define which sheet we want to bring in. In my case, I only have sheet 2. We can also define a custom range. In the configuration window, we can now see a preview of the first 100 records. In this sample data, there are only 99 records. However, in a much larger data set, you'd only see the first 100. We can click this button up here to run the workflow. Once the workflow has run, you'll get this little text box here telling you if there was any errors or warnings, and the time it took to run. Down in the preview window, we'll be able to see a preview of the data. This has a much higher limit than the first 100 records shown over here. However, in large datasets, it still won't show all of them. To view all your data, click and drag a browse tile onto the workflow. If you drop it near your input tile, it will connect automatically. Now, when we run the workflow, the data can be previewed in the browse tile. This will show all of your data and isn't limited to a certain number of records. You can also view a quick analysis of your data in the configuration window. Browse tiles are very useful, but they do have one major drawback. If you have a large data set, browse function will load all of the data into the tile. This could take up a lot of memory. Let's delete the browse tile for now. Right-click on the tile, click Delete. Let's try sorting our data. Drag a sort tile onto the screen. In the configuration window, we can change the settings for the tile. As this is a sort tile, we need to specify the column and the order in which we will sort. Let's sort on ID in ascending order. If there are multiple rows in this dataset with the same ID, we can sort on another field as well. Let's sort first on ID and then on date added. Let's choose descending for date added. Now let's run the data flow. Now that the data flow is run, we want to view the output of the tile. As you can see, the input anchor is currently a little bit larger than the output anchor. That means the input is selected. We can click on this output anchor to view the effect that the tile has had on the data. If we click here and watch the preview screen, we can see that the data is now sorted first on ID and then on date. You can also change your preview of the data when a tile is selected within the preview window. This top one is the input, and this bottom one is the output. Let's now try a select tile. Click a select tile and drag it onto the workflow. Drop it near the sort tile. The select tile lets us change the type of data that is contained within a column. At the moment, ID is currently stored as a double. This doesn't make sense as an ID. as we won't be doing any mathematics on it. Let's change it to a v-string. There are many different types that you can set. You can also change the size of a column and rename them. Let's rename the ID column product ID and the batch column to batch ID. If we click the output of the select tile, we can see that our column names have been changed. If we click on metadata, we can see that our product ID is now stored as a string. Let's now look at the formula tile. Click and drag a formula tile onto the workflow and drop it near the select tile. We need to select an output column. Let's choose add column. Let's call this profit. Using the formula tile, we can type in expressions, calculate new fields, or update existing ones. We can do this with strings, but we can also do it with numbers. So here we're going to calculate the profit. You'll notice that there are several different blue squares at the side here. Each of these has its own function. By clicking on one, we can see a list of different functions that we can use in our expression. The profit is simply the price minus the cost. If we start typing in price, you'll see in these square brackets our field name is there. Let's hit minus and then start typing cost. Again, our field is here. The data preview gives you an idea of what this is going to look like. So we can see that it is a number. We want to make sure the data type that comes out is a double. Now click Run. You'll notice in the output of your formula tile, we now have a new column, Profit. Let's now use a Summarize tile. Drag it onto the canvas and drop it near the formula tile. The Summarize tile is split into two sections. We have our fields and we have our actions. The fields contain all of our columns, and the actions will contain the actions that we're going to perform on those columns. To add an action for a column, highlight the column by clicking on it. In this drop-down in the Actions section, then choose the action that you want to perform on it. Let's group by product name. Let's highlight Profit and find the sum of the profit. Our output is going to look like a list of product names with the total profit for each product name. We could add more columns to our Actions tile, but let's leave it as this for now. When we check the output of the Summarize tile, we can see that we've got our list of product names and the profit for each product. This is the total profit summed up over all of the items in the dataset. Now that we've performed some manipulations on our data, we may want to output the data. Drag an output data tile onto the workflow and drop it near the Summarize tile. Similar to the input tile, we'll use the drop-down here to define our output. Let's say we want to output this as a CSV. We need to name our CSV, so I'm going to name it Alteryx Demo Output. Click Save. We have now configured our output tile. Currently, the output does not actually exist. We need to run the workflow one more time. After the workflow has been run, this dataset now exists. If you change your workflow before the output data tile and rerun the workflow, the output data will be rewritten. And that's some Alteryx basics. Thanks for watching.